Okay.
Okay.
I'll do
good?
some announcements real quick first.
Okay.
You can present, and then I'm
Do I just do play? Okay, cool. Yeah, you can.
It's working.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, guys. Hi. Welcome. We have some awesome guest lecturers here today. And basically, real quick before we get in, just a couple announcements. Reminder: A4 midpoint is due tomorrow, and A4 is due the following Tuesday. And then also remember Hack Challenge deadlines. Tomorrow at 11:59, the Hack Challenge team formation form is due. Also tomorrow at some point, I'm forgetting the exact time off my head, but there is a Hack Challenge team mixer where if you don't know who you want to be with for the Hack Challenge, you can go there and find people from other courses. So yeah, just look out for both of those. And please give your attention to our awesome guest lecturers.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Adeline. And
I'm Charles.
Yeah, and we'll be going over the part 2 of SwiftUI for you all today. So let's just start by some recap of last week. Remember last week we talked about this SwiftUI that is a new declarative framework developed by Apple to replace UIKit with a more concise and readable code. And we also talked about the difference between declarative and imperative. Essentially, declarative tells you what to do, and imperative tells you like exactly how you're gonna achieve your goal. Yeah, and we also introduced this content view in SwiftUI, and it is a struct that conforms to this protocol called view. And so view, there is only one required property that is a body for this protocol. So we'll just define the property inside this view. And we also talked about why we use struct for views instead of like classes. And the reason is that first, structs are faster than classes, since structs are actually like value types instead of like reference types like classes. So that makes like copying faster for struct. And also since struct doesn't support inheritance, and that just makes it simpler. Yeah, and we also talked about modifiers that are something that you can apply to your views and produce like a different version of your views. And so just keep in mind that the order of modifiers actually matter. As you can see, like these two produce like different views. Yeah, last thing we talked about is layouts. So there are like multiple ways to lay out your components in SwiftUI. For example, you can lay out things like horizontally using edge stack. You can also use VStack to put things in like a vertical order, and also ZStack that you can overlay like different view. And there's also a thing called spacer that is a flexible space that expands along your major axis within this view. Yeah, so that kind of like wrapped up what we talked about last time, and we'll talk about navigation this time. Yeah, so remember in UIKit, in order to go from a view to another, we use this thing called UI navigation controller. However, in SwiftUI, we'll use this thing called navigation stack. And actually, navigation stack is only introduced after iOS 16, and before that, we use a thing called navigation view. But they basically serve the same purpose. Okay, so essentially what navigation stack does is that it is used to present a stack of views over a root view, and that users can add views, like push views to the top of the stack by like clicking or like tapping on your navigation link. And we will dive into what navigation link is later. And yeah, and there are also something called navigation modifiers. Remember that we talked about we can add modifiers to views to like produce a different kind of version of view. And since navigation stack is also a view, we can also add navigation modifiers to our view that are nested inside this navigation stack. And for example, as you can see here, we can set the title. We can also choose to whether present or hide the back button, or you can also change the display mode of the navigation view. Yeah, and then we talked about navigation link in the which is something that people click or tap on when they want to present this view, like when they want to push this view on top of the stack. And so basically you can control the visual appearance of your navigation link by providing contents into this label closure. For example, if you want to let users push a detailed recipe view when they click on some recipe card, then your recipe card will be the content that goes into this label closure. And then the destination view, which is the view that you're pushing onto the stack, will goes into here between the first two brackets. And that's the destination view of this navigation link. Okay, so now we'll demo this navigation real quick. So you can go, I'll give you like 1 minute to go to like the GitHub and then like clone the repository from it. I believe it's on the course website. Does anyone still need time to clone the repository? Yes?
Would it be possible to turn off the light?
Just hit the lights button. Yeah, and then you go to preset 2. You might have to tap it again. Preset 2.
Okay, we'll get started. Yeah, so you can go to the content view inside of this file, and we'll go over this content that's already here. Oh, wait, sorry, I have the wrong version. Okay, yeah, so we'll go over what is inside this content view first. And so we can see here we have a VStack that stacks this profile view and the button vertically, and inside this profile view we have just this image, this newbie image, and then we also have 3 tags, that's name, location, and count. And we can see that these 3 tags are like grouped into one group, and then we can just like add one modifier font to this group, and then it's gonna be applied to all 3 different views, 3 different text. And yeah, and then we also have this button here that's just a button that doesn't have any effect when you tap on it. Okay, so what we want to do right now is that we want to that users, when I click on this view bird button, it's gonna push this this view here onto a stack. So what we want to do is that first we want to wrap the view currently inside our buddy into a navigation stack like this. So we'll just put this whole VStack inside this navigation stack. Okay, And then the next thing we want to do is that we can also add a title to our navigation stack. So for example, we can do navigation title, and then we'll just set it to bird watch. Okay. And just one thing to keep in mind is that your navigation title, this modifier, is not added to this navigation stack, but added to the actual view nested inside your navigation stack. So here it is this vstack. Okay, and yeah, so the next thing we want to do is that we want to actually let the view be pushed on when this button is clicked. So what we need to do is that we have to add a navigation link. Okay, and inside this navigation link, we'll put the destination view. And then what we want this navigation link to look like will go into this label closure. And yeah, we'll just do label. And then since we want it to look like this button right here, so we'll just put this view bird button inside this label closure. Okay, and yeah, so as we just said, we want to provide the destination view to be the bird list view so that it's gonna be pushed on after we click on this button. So we'll just do bird list view here. Okay, so now we can try clicking on this button, and then yeah, it pushes this bird list view after we click on it. You can also just click this, oops. You can also just click this back button to go back, to like put, like pop the view off. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? All right, we'll go to the next demo. Oh, it's okay, it's just one. Yeah. We'll go to the next demo right after this. Okay, so now what we want to do next is that we want to have, you can see there's a count text there. We want to have a button that says count, and then whenever we click onto that, like whenever we click that button, the count will increment by 1. And what we want to do first in order to achieve that is that we want to first add a button for count. So we can just copy this view birds button first, and then we'll modify it later. So I'll just add a button and then change its name to like count button here. And then I'll change the text to add count. And then change the color to maybe like green. Okay. Yeah. And then we wanted to maybe just put it like left to this view bird button. So we'll go back to the vstack here. And then we have, since we want to like put it horizontally right next to the view bird button, we'll need a edge stack. So we'll do count button here, and then we'll put our view bird button after that. Yeah, so you can see now we have this add count button here. Okay, so now it actually does nothing when you click on it, since this button isn't actually a button, it's just a text that is wrapped inside a rectangle. So we'll actually make it a button like this, and then we'll provide the visual appearance of this button will be this thing right here that we already have. Okay. Yeah. Oh.
Why did you put the H stack within the V stack?
Okay, so since the V stack is like you're arranging this image first, and then you have this like the name, location, count, this profile view first on top of your two buttons, right? So that's like a vertical order of your profile view and then your buttons. So that's a V stack. And then inside, like the two buttons, what you how you want to arrange it is like in a horizontal way. So that's why you put an edge stack. So you nest a edge stack inside a V stack. Okay, so now we have the button here, and then what we want to do when we click on the button will go here as the action of this button. So since we want to know what a count is, we have to introduce a variable. So we'll just go ahead and then make a variable here that is called count, and then of type int, and we'll just initialize it to be 0. So now after we have this variable, we can just go ahead and then increment it by 1 here. Okay, so as you can see, Xcode kind of just gives us some error, and it says that since self is immutable. So remember that our view is a struct, and a struct is actually immutable. So we can't just go ahead and change some property of it, because essentially when we're changing this property, we're actually changing the entire struct, the entire view itself. But we actually only want to change this single count property, and what do we do is that we can use a thing called property wrapper. And there's a property wrapper called state, and then this state actually just declares a mutable state. So when this state property changes, Swift will just automatically like re-renders the whole view and then update according to how the property changes. So as you can see now, the error just like disappears because we declares this property to be mutable. And then we can try, okay, and then since we want to see that count being reflected somewhere on our view, we'll have to just put it right after the count here. So I'll just do I'll just concatenate it to this count, and then do like this. As you can see, it's 0 right now. So we'll try clicking on it, and then it increments by 1 as I click. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. So that's our second demo, and then we'll go to our part 2 of our second demo. Right, if you didn't keep up with what I just did, you can go to your terminal and then do git stash to save your change, and then we can check out another branch to go to another branch that we already have the startup like the start code for our next demo. So you can do git stash, and then we can do git check out. I remember, wait, I think it's 2. The branch is called 2 button. Yeah. So that should give you the start code for our next demo. All right, is everyone ready? Okay, so I'll start our part 2 of the demo. And what we want to do next is actually add a new bird to our bird list using this name and location we type in. So what we want to do is that we first also need 2 variables for our name and location. So we'll just go ahead and create these 2 variables. And we can just like copy this count and then do similar things. And then change the name to name of type string, and then we'll just initialize it with an empty string. And then do the same thing for location. Alright, so next what we want to do is that we want to have a button somewhere here that allows us to add a new bird when we type something into this name and location field. So we'll just create another button like this. We can just copy our add count button and then change the name to add bird button. Okay, and then we'll change the action later. And for the text for the button, we'll just put add bird, and then color we'll give it a orange. Alright, so after we have this button, we'll just place it after these 2 buttons. So like add a button, which we'll just put it into the V stack, which is here. Okay, so it's here right now. And what we want to do next is that we want to make this name and location to be into a text field where we can type something into. So we will go ahead to here, and we don't want this text anymore, we want it to be text field. Okay, so here you can see it's asking us to provide a text that is where we want to write this the thing we type on to. So where we want to write the thing we just typed to is basically just the name and location variable we have here. So we can just go ahead and then put name and location here. Okay, so now you can see it's saying that there's an error. We can't just introduce this variable here. So why there's this error is actually since in the count button we just had, we're actually just incrementing the count. So at the time we're only reading the value of the count. However, here for name and location, we're actually not only reading it but also writing it, because we're typing the thing and then put it into the value, right? So we can't just use this variable name here. We'll have to add a $sign for it, and then that basically just creates a two-way bindings, which is read and write, because now we want to both read and write, not only read. So we need this $sign to be here to create this two-way bindings. And so essentially what this does is that when I type something here, for example, if I just type like Adeline, it's actually my property name is being changed as I type. And typically like two-way bindings are passed into like interactive views like text field or things like slider, where we like allow users to like change the value of the property. So here we will need this $sign to be here in order to actually write here. Okay, so now we have this bindings here. What we want to do next is that we just need to add a new bird to our list, to our bird list. So remember in our bird.swift, we have like this array of birds, which is called birds. So we just want to like append a new bird to this array to be displayed in our bird list view. So what we need to do is that here in the action closure of our button, we'll just do birds.append and then give it a new bird. We'll just we'll need to construct a new bird here. That is bird, and then with name, location, as we just write, and then image, it's called newbie, and then the count, we'll just use our current count. So what we're doing here is that we're first constructing a new bird object, and then we will append it to our birds array, so that later in our bird list view, it's gonna appear there because our birds array is updated. And after this, we might just want to set our text field to be blank. So we'll just do name blank and count, location, empty string. Okay, so now we can just try typing some name. We'll do Charles, and then we can try clicking on this app bird, and then we want to see if it's actually reflected in our bird list view. We'll just click on this view bird button and then scroll down. We can see Charles is here. Okay, so that's the end of this part 2 demo. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Is count supposed to be also set to 0?
Yeah, you can just reset it to 0. That depends on what you want your application to proceed. Okay, if no one has any questions, I'll pass it on to Charles.
Can you like comment notes?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, so for the rest of the lecture, we're just going to go like a little bit more in depth on property wrappers. You guys have already been introduced to the state property wrapper, which I'll briefly discuss here and give you like another brief demo of. Yeah, so we use at state when we have a view that creates and owns this instance that you want to wrap. So if I have like that count variable that Adeline was showing to you guys previously, the view actually created that count variable and we wanted to kind of change it within that view itself. So we kind of use state to like give us this like new mutability that we didn't previously have with the structs. And yeah, we use state when we have a value type, which was a struct when we previously used it, and we typically mark them as private just for best practice. And we also showed you guys how to use the $sign for two-way binding. But what if we wanted to do something a little bit more complex, like maybe we have like a user or something and we kind of want to modify the properties of our user. So I'm going to kind of show you guys. I don't really have like the Git code for you guys to like check out. This is kind of like a little demo that I put together myself. But yeah, okay. Can we see well? Okay, cool. So yeah, we have this struct here right now, which has, it's like a lecturer's object, and we want to change it to see like, I don't know, maybe we want to see who's the best lecturers or something, right? You know. So right now, this actually works using state, and we're setting our state object, we're setting our state variable to be this new instance of lecturers that we just created right here on line 21. And we see when I not do that, but when I edit this right here, it kind of works as we would want it to, right? But the problem with this is that a struct is a value type. So when I'm changing this right here, we're actually kind of like creating a new instance of our lecturers object, which we don't really want to do, right? We just wanted to edit the property right here. We want to change first of our lecturers to be Adeline right here, right? So if we wanted to do that, we would need to use a reference type, right? So now I'm going to change the struct to a class. And this almost does what I want it to do. But now it doesn't actually update our instance that we want it to, right? So I'm gonna kind of like break down what's happening, and then I'll kind of like show how we can get around this using property wrappers, right? So maybe I can go back. Okay, cool. Just did that, kind of. Okay. So this is kind of like what was happening previously with our count variable, right? We kind of had like this random variable, and we directly changed it within our view. And this is just an example with a string, right? But now we have something a little different, right? Because we're referencing an object and we're referencing a struct. So I kind of showed you guys previously like the issue with kind of using a struct as our state reference right here, because we're creating a new instance and structs are value types, and we don't really want to do that, right? So what's happening is essentially we're creating a new instance and we're creating an entirely new ID, which kind of gives us like, it seems like it's working, but if we have a larger scale application, it's not exactly pretty. We might be wasting code, we might be wasting memory, etc. It's not giving us exactly what we want to do, because essentially all we really want to do is edit the actual instance. Like we want one ID, but we're creating two right here, which is not cool, right? So we're gonna use a class instead, but I kind of just showed you that doesn't really work either, right? Because we're not actually changing our ID. Like it's not that easy, I guess. So we want to introduce a new property wrapper, which is state object. So state object is really similar to state, but it's used on an observable object. And we're going to have these new property wrappers at publish, which I'll show you guys how to use in this demo. And essentially, the state object is very similar to state in the sense that we have our state object, which will be like some variable or value that we're referencing. And we're going to be monitoring the changes to that object, right? So if I kind of go back to my demo, now I'm going to change this to a state object. However, I'm also getting this error, right? This is because my lecturer's like object doesn't actually conform to the observable object protocol, which I stated previously that we need to conform to, right? It's kind of like, yeah, it's just a protocol, which you guys might have seen like something really similar in 2110. However, this still doesn't work, right? And that's because we're not using published, because once we do this state object, once we use this property wrapper state object, we don't actually know what exactly we're trying to like monitor the changes of, because we can have this is a really simple object, right? Lectures, it just has a first and a second. But if we had like a bunch of things, if we had a user with like a million attributes or something, we might not want to actually like change. If we make one change to the object, we might not actually want to be monitoring like every single attribute of the object. So we can mark the actual variables that we want to change with @published. Right, and now, yeah, now we are getting our desired functionality. We can kind of change both the lecturers, and we're actually changing the original instance of our lecturers this time versus creating an entirely new one. Yeah, do you guys have any questions about that? No? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll give a kind of slight recap as to what I just did, right? We just created a class, we conformed it to the observable object protocol, and we changed the variables that we actually want to change to @published, right? And so I guess I'll kind of like go back and show you, like, yeah, if I didn't have this be @published, yeah, still it just doesn't change, right? Which we kind of just went through. So we have to mark both of our attributes as @published. So yeah.
So if we didn't have it in the class form with like the struct form, wasn't it still working the same way as
If we didn't have it, what?
when we had it in the form of a struct instead of a class, wasn't it working the same way as we have it when it's published?
Yeah, it's working. Like, I guess the UI changes are the exact same,
Yeah.
but what's actually happening like under the hood is entirely
So this
different.
is just for efficiency that we're doing that.
In some sense, yes.
Okay.
Can you explain what you mean by when you say a new instance is created when you use the normal state tag?
Okay, I'll try and like go back a little bit in the slides, but okay, you're kind of like talking about this, right? I would assume. Okay, so as Adeline was kind of saying earlier, structs are essentially immutable for like all that we care about, right? So when I actually change a value on that struct, it's creating an entirely new struct, and I don't really want to do that. Does that make more sense? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so now we have like maybe a different problem, right? What if we have a view that doesn't own a property that we want to reference? So we can introduce this new property wrapper @binding. So this is, I don't know, it's kind of pretty similar to inheritance. That's kind of like what helps me think about it. So if I have a variable that's like @binding, that's essentially me saying like there's some parent object that exists that creates this original instance of this like variable that I'm trying to monitor, and @binding essentially says that I can change this same instance in my parent in my child. So, and I guess like more formally, I can read and write to a property that's owned by my parent view, and the property being wrapped is still a value type. So I would use this if I have like a struct or an enum, and I still use the $sign for two-way binding to the property. and state and binding kind of go hand in hand a little bit. And I'll also try and like give a brief demo as to how that works. So like I'm also using like a navigation stack and a navigation link right here, which Adeline kind of previously demoed for you guys. But I'm gonna go to this next screen, right? And I want something to change when I click this toggle, right? And I kind of use two screens here just to like demonstrate that we have like two views that we're working with, right? So essentially, I have this child view, which I created over here, and it has this like parameter, I guess, if you will, that is on, and it's at binding, right? So essentially this means that there's some object in another view, which is my content view right here, which is just a state variable, and I kind of like made this is_on variable, which, yeah, this is how we would define like any other state variable. And my child view directly calls this state variable, and it observes the changes that I would make. So now, once I click the toggle, it changes this binding value in both my views. So they're both kind of referencing the same value, but they're two different views. Does that make sense?
What happens if I don't have the binding key here?
Okay, let's see. Well, okay, if you don't have the binding key and you're trying to do what? Well, yeah, it's because I like implemented this using the binding, like, because okay, what, can you like rephrase your question? Sorry.
So like, is there any other way to do it without binding?
Any other way to do it without binding where I would still have the like original
Value sent to
object?
the-
Would there be? I feel like there is another way, but
So binding just means that that it isn't owned by this child view. So in order for us to actually modify the is on up there, for this view to be able to modify it, we'd have to mark is on as at binding, and that basically makes it so that when this view changes is on, it'll also reflect up there in that other view. Does that make sense? So you need at binding. At binding just means that the variable is not from this view. It's inside of another view, and we can change it from this view, but we have to use the at binding property wrapper for that.
So is it kind of like delegation in that sense?
I guess that's a
Yes,
good way to think about it.
That is a good way to think about it, yeah. Sorry.
So the variable's not marked as private, and would you just be able to change it without needing that binding?
Which variable?
If your original state is on.
This one?
Yeah, if that's not private, can you change it without needing the variable in your child?
I don't think me changing it like private and not private doesn't really change whether or not I need to use like at binding, but it kind of just like changes how I would access it. But in this sense, it doesn't really matter if it's like private or not. That's kind of just like for practice, I suppose. Does that answer your question?
We're doing this because structs are immutable, right?
Yeah.
Since structs are immutable, we have to use state and binding.
Yes. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Okay. Yeah, that is at binding. And observed object is really similar to binding. I don't have like an example of that in the demo, but it's essentially the same thing, but for classes are reference types. Okay. And there's also a few more property wrappers if we wanted to share a property to multiple views, right? Because right now we're kind of sharing properties between two different views, right? So yeah, I feel like the most simple way for me to say this is like, yeah, it's really similar to observed object, but it can be shared to multiple views. And it's the same in the sense that the view itself doesn't create our only instance that I'm trying to access. Okay, so this is kind of like a brief overview as to like what property wrappers you might use in different scenarios. So if this would be like kind of if your view, like the view that you're currently looking at, owns the value. So like if it's an immutable value, you would simply use a regular property, right? You don't really need any property wrappers there. This is kind of what you guys are used to, and I believe what we did like last lecture. And if we just have like a mutable value, like a string, an int, whatever, right? We would use @state to like change the value as we previously discussed. And if we have an observable object, we would use state object. So if we have like some reference type or something that we're trying to change the values of, right? And then if the data comes from a parent, if it's an immutable value, same thing, right? We don't actually need any sort of property wrappers for that. If it's a mutable value, we use @binding as previously shown, so you can kind of like access that parent value. And if it's an observable object, then we simply use observed object in the same sense that we used like binding. So if you have like a reference type, you would use observed object, and if you don't, then you would use binding. Yeah, and so this is a little bit more complicated. I would say for @environment, I've never actually had to use it, but I would say it more so references like actual built-in functionality that Swift has. Yeah, I feel like that's the best way to say it, because all of like the @environment different like properties are built in with Swift. And if we have like an environment object that we're trying to like share throughout multiple views, then we use the environment object, which we had a whole slide about. And if the data is like saved on the disk, we also have like a few different more complicated sorts of property wrappers, which I can't imagine you guys would use like too soon, but in the future, definitely. So if we have like user defaults and we're working with data that's like stored in the entire app, possibly, we might want to use the app storage property wrapper. If we have like a single scene, which this is like a really niche scenario, I suppose, like maybe if you're doing like Mac OS development or something like that, you would use @scene storage. And if you're using like core data, if you're trying to like manage some complicated data, possibly you would use like fetch request, right? And there's a little bit of like kind of new functionality and like a little bit of like obsoleteness in what I just told you, because they changed a few things in iOS 17 to make things less complicated and headachy for the developers. So we can now kind of like import this observation thing. I don't really know how to describe it, but yeah, instead of having to like conform our class to observable object, now we can simply like use this @observable tag, and we get the same functionality that we would like previously want without having to use the @published vars. Yeah, it's like a lot less to keep track of, and it's the same exact functionality. And that is it for today, I guess.
All right.
Yeah.
Kahoot time.
Oh,
Sorry, guys, you aren't getting away without a Kahoot today.